Tonight on Spotlight, an investigation into the last 10 years of MLA expenses. We've examined the records to see where over £8 million of public money is going every year. Hundreds of thousands of pounds go into office expenses, but it seems impossible to know where that money ends up.
Where's the openness? Where's the transparency? Where's the accountability?
We ask why Sinn Fein are paying rents to phony societies. And we ask why a government minister got a rent-free office from a businessman.
Well, you're all very welcome to Parliament buildings. Can you all hear me all right, by the way?
Stormont has become a popular tourist attraction.
Buckingham Palace is made out of Portland stone, so our building's made of Portland stone as well. Only the best is good enough for us in Belfast. There's a lot of schools that come up here, there are a lot of events here as well. So please have a seat, comfy benches. The money it might cost to run this place, I get that asked quite a lot. Not that I can divulge that really, and that's not my remit whatsoever.
But costs, the use of public money, and in particular their office expenses, are the remit of MLAs. They can claim over £69,000 a year. It covers whatever is needed to run their offices: rent, rates, electricity, heating, and support staff. MLAs fill in a form to claim back their costs. And they sign it to confirm the funds have been wholly and exclusively incurred in connection with assembly duties. They're meant to operate with openness and transparency. In 2006, during talks at St Andrews, the government was desperate to get the politicians back to Stormont.
Today, there was a little bit of history.
The then Secretary of State issued a financial threat.
Assembly members will no longer be paid. Party funding will be stopped immediately. Stormont will shut down.
But once a deal was in place, he rewarded MLAs by increasing office expenses from £48,000 to £68,000.
It was this barefaced, in my opinion, seduction. I mean, to put office cost allowance up overnight. How in the name of goodness could you justify that?
And the majority of MLAs claim close to the maximum. In our examination of 10 years of office expenses, this former Alliance member was consistently the lowest overall claimer. Seamus Close regularly claimed half the costs of most MLAs.
There was this culture that if there was an office cost allowance, say, of £30,000, then members should spend that £30,000. And I know for a fact that there were those that thought I was insane because I didn't spend it all.
MLA's office rents cost the public around £800,000 every year. The member in this office claims the highest rent of all, £20,000 a year in Market Street, Omagh. We wanted to see what Ulster Unionist Ross Hussey gets for that money.
Hello Ross, how are you?
Good morning, welcome to Omagh. Can I introduce you to my PA? This is my PA, Leslie.
Hi Leslie, how are you?
Well, this is my office and this is where I will meet most of my constituents. Whenever they do come into the office, it's generally me they want to see.
You've just over 2,000 square feet here. You
It
use
sounds
it
a
all?
lot. It sounds a lot, but we do use it all. We have a lift to get people upstairs, and I need it as well because unfortunately I have a disability with my back. So if you're happy enough, we'll go up in the lift.
This is quite a size.
This is a good room for role play. It's a good room for us to discuss some of the cases that are more complex.
What's the most common problem?
Well, at the minute it's welfare. We deal with new DLA claims and we deal with DLA renewals. We're open Monday to Friday and I open on a Saturday. I'm generally in early. 7:30 is usually my start time here. I tell my mother I'll be home at lunchtime. Lunchtime might be 3, might be 3:30. But I'm here as long as it takes.
3 years ago, the Assembly appointed the Independent Financial Review Panel to oversee the expenses system and take decisions about pay and pensions away from politicians.
Let me introduce my two colleagues, Dr. Etta Campbell and Mr. Alan McQuillan. I'm Pat McCartan.
They think many office rents are too expensive.
For the Northern Ireland Assembly.
We believe that somewhere between £5,000 and £8,000 would be adequate to provide for each MLA in terms of rent.
Ross Hussey, with his £20,000 a year rent, says he can't run a good constituency service out of a smaller office.
The Financial Review Panel got it totally wrong. They are not working in a situation that I am, where I have an awful lot of people coming in and out of my office. This office does what it says on the tin.
No, you don't need that size of an office to provide a service. I mean, you're providing a service for the electorate. The electorate's not going to come in and say, oh, I must vote for him or her. Look at the beautiful office. They're going in with the problem that they want solved.
Ross Hussey is open about his office, but there's a great lack of transparency elsewhere. The Sinn Fein Agriculture Minister, Michelle O'Neill, used to be based in this building at Gulladuff outside Mahara. She billed Stormont £18,000 a year in rent.
But the Assembly set the rental valuation at a lower rate.
And the Sinn Fein member based here now claims less than £11,000.
All of the MLAs who've claimed rent for this building have paid it to the South Derry Cultural Society or the Cultural and Heritage Society. It should be straightforward to find out where that public money ended up, but it's not.
When the Gulladuff building opened, the Republican newspaper, An Phoblacht, described it as Sinn Féin's Mid-Ulster headquarters. But Sinn Féin are not the official owners. It's listed in Land Registry in the names of 6 trustees, all with Republican backgrounds. We wanted to know if they were getting the rent. They weren't keen to talk to us, but eventually one of them agreed to an interview. Mickey McGonigal knows the background of the building well.
Sinn Féin is the only party which offers the nationalist people an alternative.
Around 30 years ago, he and a well-known Republican, John Davey, seen here canvassing in an election, raised the funds to buy it.
We were on a draw. Myself and John Davey went to certain people we knew we could get donations off, and that's how the money was got for the hall. And it was bought for Sinn Féin, a Sinn Féin hall.
And there are other clues that seem to support that. Its name in Irish is the Mid-Ulster Republican Centre, and there's an IRA memorial garden beside it. Mickey McGonigal has left the party, but on paper is still one of the legal owners.
Whenever the hall was bought, there had to be so many trustees. And John Davies said to me, you're going to be one of the trustees. That's how I come to be a trustee of that hall. And I'm still a trustee and will be a trustee to the day I die.
You would expect a trustee of a building to know where the rent goes.
Have you ever received rent?
No. Like, trustees, I couldn't see how trustees would be receiving rent. Rent from who?
Sinn Fein have paid a considerable amount of rent out of public funds for many years on that building. Did you know anything about that as a trustee, as one of the official owners?
No. Who's that money paid to? But who?
Well, we have been told, and in the expenses, the money was paid to South Derry Cultural Society. Have you ever heard of that group?
I never heard it tell that group. Never did.
We spoke to a lawyer who used to work for the Assets Recovery Agency.
So if someone is listed at Land Registry as the trustee, as the official owner of a building, would you expect that person to know what was going on in the building? Who was getting the rent?
I'd certainly expect them to know who was receiving the rent, and certainly in general terms at least what purpose the building was being used for.
We also took our documentation to a solicitor who's an expert on the role of trustees.
So these are 6 trustees. From this document, can we determine that they are the legal owners, but that they're holding it in trust for another entity, another body?
They are the legal owners, but why 6 individuals who appear to have no connection, they don't appear to be from the same family, why would 6 people come together to buy this property?
And if they're not getting the money, as the owners of the Gulliduff building, who is? Where is all the publicly funded rent given to the South Derry Cultural Society by Sinn Fein actually ending up? It's not just Gulliduff that's linked to a society. Sinn Fein also pay rent to 3 other societies. Deputy First Minister Martin McGuinness, Francie Malloy MP, and MLAs Mitchell McLaughlin and Dahi Mackay all paid rent to societies. We wanted to know, was it possible to join the societies or find out something more about them? So we asked a member of our team to call them. Posing as a tourist, looking to trace her ancestors, she asked if she could become a member. First, we contacted the office in Cookstown, where Francie Malloy pays his rent.
Hello, I'm trying to get through to the Tyrone Cultural Society.
All right, well,
Are you a member of the society?
Uh-huh.
Okay, but I'm just trying to trace some family history.
Oh, sorry, so it's a historic, right.
It's a historical question, yes. So what did they do, sort of community dances or anything? What sort of...
well, it would be... It's not so much, no, not really, you know, it's maybe more political than, you know.
So the Tyrone Cultural Society essentially, does it exist?
It does, but it's more on, it'd be more on involved in the sort of political history, if you know what I mean.
Next, we rang Martin McGuinness's office in Coal Island, which he also rents from the Tyrone Cultural Society.
Hello, Sinn Fein Away Centre. Do the Tyrone Cultural Society sort of have classes or dances or something like that? Or
No, it's different. We have a Republican museum upstairs just that people can visit, and that's really all.
Oh, so it's not sort of society that meets every week or something like that?
No.
Ah, right, okay. So essentially I can't join the actual society?
No.
Here in the village of Dunloy, the Sinn Féin MLA Dahi Mackay has used public funds to rent not 1, but 2 offices.
This is Mr Mackay's first office here in Main Street at Dunloy. But here, just round the corner, is Mr Mackay's second office. Until recently, the chairman of the Public Accounts Committee was paying £12,000 rent to 2 landlords for 2 offices that are almost within touching distance of each other.
Dahi Mackay told us one office was used as his private office, the other as a public advice centre. One of those offices was rented from the North Antrim Historical Society. A year ago, Dahi Mackay stopped paying rent to them when the lease expired. Yet strangely, when we phoned a few months later, the staff didn't seem to know anything about it.
I'm just trying to do some research into my ancestry.
Oh, here, do you know, this is the North Antrim Sinn Fein office.
This isn't the North Antrim...
No, it's not.
But the North Antrim Society, you don't have any contact details or email or something?
It seemed to be impossible to contact the society. The big question is why Sinn Féin choose to pay rent to societies at all.
Spotlight has spoken to two senior Republican sources who've told us the party set up societies as fronts to get financial benefits not available to political parties. In the case of South Derry Cultural and Heritage Society, there does seem to be an advantage.
It was exempted from rates because Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs has placed it on its deemed charities list.
And that's not the only benefit it gets.
Currently, that means that the charity is not liable to pay income tax on its income. It's not liable for capital gains tax if it has investments and makes gains on those investments. It's not liable to pay rates on any property that it occupies for charitable purposes.
What about accountability if you were on the deemed charities list?
There's currently no real accountability. The revenue can make inquiries, but I'm not aware of them having done any major inquiries in Northern Ireland in recent years.
We asked HMRC how the South Derry Cultural Society got on the deemed charities list, but they wouldn't tell us. We also asked, were there any circumstances where political parties could use societies to get a charitable benefit? They said no.
Are you surprised that they don't pay rates for that hall?
Well, all I know as a member of Republican Sinn Féin, we have an office on the Falls Road in Belfast, and I am a trustee of it, and we pay heavy rates every year in that. But we wouldn't go down that road to get money, to be quite frankly, from the British establishment to pay our rates. If we took the name of Republican Sinn Féin off our building and put it onto some charitable organisation or something, we would have free rates, but we wouldn't do that.
Over the past 10 years, Martin McGuinness has paid £96,000 in rent from his expenses to societies. We asked the Deputy First Minister if he knew where his rent had gone. It would be odd if he didn't know. As an official face of one of the societies he paid rent to is a man he knows well. He's called Barry Murphy. We found his name on this letter, which he wrote on behalf of the South Derry Cultural and Heritage Society. He's a Sinn Féin party worker who has dealt with their finances in Mid-Ulster. He was also election agent for Martin McGuinness and Francie Malloy. He's seen here with both of them at an election meeting in the Gulladuff Hall. And Mr. Murphy's cultural interests extend beyond South Derry. He's also secretary of the North Antrim Historical Society. There's nothing in the Assembly rulebook to stop a political party owning an office and renting it to an MLA. But if they were to put it on the books, they would have to declare it to the Electoral Commission.
We asked Jerry Adams about ownership of the Gulliduff Hall. He sent us a letter and said, "Your assertion that Sinn Fein owns premises at Gulliduff is unfounded and without substance. We have no such asset to declare to the Electoral Commission."
We asked him if the trustees received rent for the building. He said, "This is a matter for the landlord." We asked who paid tax on the rent. He said, "This is a matter for the landlord." We asked why Sinn Féin didn't pay rates for the building. Again, he referred us to the landlord. So who is the landlord Jerry Adams keeps referring us to when we ask about public money?
You've already established who the landlord is. You've shown me the land certificate that shows 6 people own the building. They are the landlord, collectively.
So the 6 people, some of whom have told us they know absolutely nothing about any money going into this building, are officially the landlords.
According to the land registry.
But they told us they're not getting the rent. So who's benefiting from it? The Electoral Commission confirmed to us that if a political party were to own a building, they should declare it.
Sinn Féin pay rent to a number of societies. We can't find any evidence of who actually is receiving the money. I mean, what's your reaction to that?
Where's the openness? Where's the transparency? Where's the accountability?
How would we prove that this is not a society, it's a front?
I'm afraid it's really impossible for an individual under the current legislation to prove it's a front. Currently, you and I as private individuals would have great difficulty, and I think we would really find it impossible to prove that it was or was not a legitimate society.
This man has been described as the sleaze watchdog of Westminster. Alistair Graham chaired the Commons Committee on Public Standards. He also knows Northern Ireland well from his work with the Parades Commission.
So it sounds to me that there is a real danger that these so-called cultural bodies are rather bogus organisations, which is a way of channeling public money to political parties, and there clearly should be some detailed investigation.
In the coming weeks, the Independent Financial Review Panel are due to report on a major review of expenses. They're going to insist on full disclosure about office ownership.
We will require in the new determination absolute transparency of the beneficial ownership of any premises that are rented by an MLA. For example, should they be owned by a trust, then the trusteeship will be fully declared and be a part of any rental agreement. Otherwise, we will not be paying rent in those circumstances.
In a statement, Sinn Féin say their rental of offices is fully compliant with all Revenue, Assembly and Electoral Commission rules. It's not just with Sinn Féin, where it's hard to find out where the rent ends up.
This DUP office here at Church Street in Ballymena holds the record for the highest rent ever claimed from the Assembly for a single property, £57,000. Ian Paisley Jr. and his father claimed it in rent 2 years in a row. Since then, the Assembly has set the rental valuation of this building at less than half of that, £23,000.
These days, the building is used by 2 MLAs, David McElveen and Paul Frew, as well as the local MP, Ian Paisley Jr. Last year, the rent claimed by the 2 MLAs was below the £23,300 valuation. But Ian Paisley Jr. also claimed rent from Westminster, taking the overall figure going into this building to almost £11,300 above the valuation. We asked Mr. Paisley to explain the discrepancy. He said the owners of the Ballymena Advice Centre had got their own independent valuation. He also said the advice centre had to subsidise the rent in order to meet its mortgage commitments. But it's the Assembly's valuation and not the independent valuation that counts. We asked the Assembly if their figure only applied to that part of the building used by the MLAs and not Mr Paisley. They said the valuation report for £23,300 was for the whole building, including the area used by the MP. We asked Ian Paisley what was the justification for him and his colleagues claiming substantially more money, but he never got back to us. MLAs have agreed to be open and transparent about their expenses, but here again, money is going into a building and the public don't know where it ends up. The building was bought with a mortgage for £500,000, and public funds from office expenses have already paid off over half that amount. Exactly who will benefit once the mortgage is paid off remains mysteriously unclear. Journalist David Gordon, who now works for the BBC, spent years investigating MLA's expenses.
It's a key question. It's one of the basic journalistic questions: who benefits? So if a property asset is being created, who's going to benefit in the long term from that? If the company now or in the future starts turning a profit from the rents it claims from the Assembly, who benefits from that? It's not entirely unreasonable to ask those questions.
When we asked Ian Paisley who the ultimate beneficiary of the rent was, he said, Ballymena Advice Centre exists to provide an advice centre for the use by DUP elected representatives. The company is bound to provide in perpetuity an advice centre facility. We weren't sure how that answer related to our question, but what is clear is that public money is being used to help the company buy an asset, and that would appear to be a breach of the rule which says the money mustn't be used to buy property. I went to Company's House to find out about the Ballymena Advice Centre. It's owned by a company, also called the Ballymena Advice Centre. It seems the sole director and shareholder is a 65-year-old farmer and DUP councillor, Sam Hannah. In 2009, the Belfast Telegraph asked him about the company's profits. He said, "I know flip all about it."
I contacted Sam Hannah, Ballymena DUP councillor, listed as the sole shareholder and director of the company, just to clarify the situation regarding the profit. And he, in a very brief answer, said to me, "I haven't a clue, I know flip all about it, but it's a very poor thing that it won't make a profit if you're in business lines at all." He also said that he left matters to accountants, adding, "I know nothing about it, I'm only the landlord," which didn't quite answer all the questions from a transparency point of view.
I mean, what was your reaction to that?
I think it reinforced the idea that it wasn't just a Sam Hannah operation and that it wasn't run solely by him. He didn't have total control over the company. If he knew flip all about it, which clearly somebody did know a little bit more than he did about it.
We went to speak to Sam Hannah. He didn't want to appear on camera.
He said he didn't know who owned the building or where the rent went. He said he was just a sidekick and that Ian Paisley Jr. had brought him in to tide things over. Mr. Hannah also said that Ian Paisley Jr. had told him that under no circumstances was he to answer any of our questions.
It is quite an unusual situation. You know, you could have a temporary director if a company's in a transitional phase. You know, there's all sorts of legitimate reasons for that. But for someone who doesn't really seem to understand or be involved in the business, that's certainly unusual.
Days after our visit to Mr. Hannah, we received an official reply from him, this time issued by the DUP press office. Despite telling us that he was just a sidekick, he confirmed in the letter that he was the sole shareholder and director of the company called the Ballymena Advice Centre. He also told us that the ultimate beneficiary of the rent is the bank. What questions would you have been asking about Ballymena?
Well, I'd find it difficult to understand how the director of a company knew so little about it, and I'd be wanting to understand who had engaged him as a director, how his involvement had come about.
Just as with Sinn Fein, were the DUP to own this building, then they too would have to declare it as an asset under the Electoral Commission rules. The review panel says transparency over ownership of offices is a top priority.
Do you think it's acceptable that the Assembly doesn't know where that public money is going?
Openness and transparency should be the watchword of every MLA.
Spotlight can reveal the review panel are considering withholding rents in the future unless MLAs can prove who the ultimate beneficiary is.
How easy do you think that will be to implement in practice?
I'm of the view that we need new and better regulation, and that's the direction we're going in.
One MLA who might have difficulty with an office transparency test is Arlene Foster. She's regarded as one of the DUP's most successful ministers and is tipped as a future leader. 4 years after she joined the party, she became Minister for Enterprise, Trade and Investment. Unusually among MLAs, she had 3 offices in her Fermanagh constituency at the same time, including this one in Kesh that she used part-time. It's owned by this man, David Mahon, a businessman who's director of over 100 companies. He's also Grand Master of the Orange Order in Donegal.
I have my son here, which is a member of Ballymena Lodge, and my grandson, which is wearing a wee Ballymena Lodge collarette.
Arlene Foster's former landlord is one of the founding members of the Orange Order's Ulster Land and Property Company, set up to keep land in Orange hands. Arlene Foster doesn't use the cash office now, but for 7 years she used it rent-free, and during that period she claimed public money to pay the rates on Mr Mahon's building.
Would alarm bells ring if you heard the Northern Ireland Enterprise and Trade Minister claiming an office whereby rates are paid but no rent?
Yes, I would, because I think there would be a potential conflict of interest.
There's another link between Arlene Foster and David Mahon. He signed her nomination papers for the last Assembly election.
There's a very clear position for such situation to be declared as connected parties, and for that to be open and transparent, and that allows public scrutiny of what's going on.
We wrote to Arlene Foster about receiving a rent-free office. The day after she received our letter, she added the cash office to her Stormont Declaration of Interests. It seems she had suddenly decided to declare what her party called a low-level donation in the interests of openness and transparency. The DUP said no rules had been broken, as the value of the donation was less than £1,000 in one financial year. But that is based on the party's own estimation of weekly rent of £17.30. Arlene Foster's second office here in Lisnaskea also has a connection to David Mahon. Shortly after she became a minister, she and her husband bought part of this building on Main Street. Deeds show they purchased all of 116 and the top floor of 118. When we looked in Land Registry, we found that the building came with almost half an acre of land at the back. The couple bought the land and the building for just £75,000. The man who sold it to the Fosters was David Mahon. A few months later, he sold the remainder of the building, the ground floor of 118, again for £75,000, to members of the local Erne East branch of the DUP. Arlene Foster then rented it as a constituency office. But did the members of the Erne East branch buy the office on behalf of the DUP? Arlene Foster denies this. In a letter to Spotlight, she said the property was not owned by the DUP Erne East branch as you suggest. There were no party funds used in the purchase of this property. But in land registry, the deeds described the 4 people who bought the office as trustees of the DUP Erne East branch. If the members of the Erne East branch did buy the office on behalf of the DUP, it should have been declared to the Electoral Commission. Last year, Arlene Foster's husband bought the Lisnaskey office from the same 4 people, though this time they weren't listed as DUP trustees. Between them, the couple now own the entire building. In keeping with the rules, where an MLA can't rent from a family member, she moved out. Arlene Foster now has just one constituency office. Back in Gulliduff, Mickey McGonigal, one of the trustees of the local hall, has come under pressure to change his story since he spoke to us. 3 days ago, a man asked him to sign a letter saying that he owned the building on behalf of the South Derry Cultural and Heritage Society, the group he'd never heard of.
I turned down and I said to the boy, I'm not signing it because that hall, as far as I'm concerned, belongs to Sinn Fein. It was bought in Sinn Fein's name. I'm utterly disgusted with this letter. And if they thought that I was going to sign something which is untrue, I wasn't for doing it.
The letter had a logo and an email address for the South Derry Cultural and Heritage Society and was addressed to me.
A letter was brought round to your house which says that you are a trustee on behalf of South Derry Cultural and Heritage Society, a society which you knew nothing about until we told you about it when we last came to your house.
That's right. That's right. That's whenever I first knew that. I never had told it, or nobody ever told me.
The letter was intended to be sent to us from the trustees to convince us that Sinn Fein did not own the building. My copy of the letter was delivered to the BBC this morning. It was signed by 3 trustees stating that the hall is not owned by Sinn Fein. The name that was missing was that of Mickey McGonigal. The letter came as part of a bundle of 40 letters delivered by Sinn Fein in response to inquiries we first made 5.5 months ago. Among them one from Barry Murphy on behalf of the South Derry Cultural and Heritage Society. He said rents received were used for the upkeep and maintenance of the centre. He said the centre was used for local groups for a range of activities, including Irish dancing, drama, yoga and flower arranging. This afternoon, we received further correspondence from Sinn Fein. They said of Gulliduff, this was a worthy use of public funds and Sinn Fein gets no financial benefit from the hall. They said that the community and Sinn Fein supporters had adopted a social enterprise, not-for-profit approach in order to put the needs of the community first. And we received a letter from Martin McGuinness, who said that without wishing to appear obstructive, he thought that many of our questions about his offices were a matter for the landlord. But he said all rental income went directly to the relevant cultural societies. After all this, at tea time tonight, we got another response from Jerry Adams, repeating that Gulliduff Hall is owned by trustees on behalf of the South Derry Cultural Society. But he failed to mention that one supposed trustee, Mickey McGonigal, says he'd never heard of the society until we told him about it. In part 2 of our special investigation into MLA's expenses, we asked the research company, which got nearly £700,000 of public money, if they'd do some research for us.
Hello, I'm looking for the research company.
And the former MLA, who had thousands of pounds of mileage claimed in his name, but he couldn't drive. We also hear a call for an inquiry.
It seems to me that what you require here is a pretty root and branch independent investigation to the arrangements in place.
I have made my position absolutely clear.
And why did the former Speaker, Willie Hay, suspend his own brother-in-law from his office staff? That's Spotlight, next Tuesday, 10:35, BBC One.